When rural Southern blacks eventually moved to the cities of the North, they brought their own kind of English with them. They're young men now, but 25 years ago, Dwayne, Asheen, and Keely were students at this school. Situated in a prosperous, mostly white suburb of Ann Arbor, there were not many black kids at the Martin Luther King School. When they spoke, as they did at home, in African-American English, their teachers simply assumed they couldn't do schoolwork.
They sort of felt like we were unteachable in a sense, I would feel. So that kind of made them go towards other students more and gave them a little bit more help than they would give us.
Can you remember some of the things that were said, teachers would say?
Actually, to be honest, the teachers really didn't even communicate with us too much. It just was sort of like, in the sense that we were on our own.
Do you remember any of that? You were younger.
I was real young, but I mean, I remember enough to know that I wasn't being treated the same way as all the other kids in the class, or a lot of the other kids. You know, that's the irony of it all. It's Martin Luther King School, and, you know, they haven't learned anything from Martin Luther King. Well, hopefully they learned it, but they didn't learn it back then.
3 mothers refused to accept second best for their sons.
Annie, what was it that got you and other parents upset enough to bring a lawsuit against the school?
My kids was tested and was put into special ed classes, and I felt like that they were not getting educated and was not treated equally, and I felt like that shouldn't be a barrier because of a language to stop them from being educated.
Ruth Zweifler is a social worker familiar with the housing project the boys came from. Listening to Annie tell how her son and his friends were failing at school, she knew something was wrong.
There were maybe 24 poor black children in a sea of affluent white families, and they really were having a very hard time.
Ruth became convinced that the kids were being discriminated against because of their African-American English.
Language is the marker for assumed attitudes, coming with an implied criticism, which is what I think a black child carries with him. We as adults, as mainstream society, as Americans, have really done bad by these little kids.
Hi, Ruth.
Hey.
How are you?
How good to see you.
Good.
Unable to make any headway with the school administrators, Ruth went to Detroit. One of the lawyers she consulted was Ken Lewis. The legal strategy they and others thrashed out led to a landmark court decision on black English.
Our job was to see if we could come up with some legal theories that made sense, that we could pursue on their behalf. The initial thrust of the case was to deal with the children's poverty as the reason why they were not being educated. There is really no constitutional right not to be poor in this country, and so trying to find some constitutional provision that would help us along those lines was a futile effort. So language became a part of it, and since that language barriers seemed to impact adversely only on black youngsters, we were able to tie in the race issue.
The most significant thing that I believe was raised during that trial was that you had a federal judge acknowledge formally that African American vernacular English represented a significant linguistic barrier to academic achievement and success. He confirmed that the school district was really insensitive to the linguistic background of the vast majority of African American students within the school district.
Years later, the argument Ken Lewis used in this courthouse was raised by educators in Oakland, California. But they claimed black English, which they called Ebonics, was a separate language. That caused a national storm, and as we'll see, it's an issue school boards are still grappling with.
One of the things that I remember Judge Joyner indicating in his opinion was the need to help youngsters appreciate the difference between the language of the majority, how it would impact upon your being perceived by others. that was part of the discussion we had to wrestle with in the Black English case, because we thought that the teachers were not respecting the language as it should have been.
If a young black who talked like Puff Daddy applied for a job in this law firm, would he get it?
The reality is he has to fit the criteria, the skills that are required for this particular job. Just like if I wanted to go on the radio and become the commentator for the R&B, rap, hip-hop station, I'm going to have to change my language skills because I got a different audience I'm appealed to. I'm wrestling with it now with my own 15-year-old who, you know, communicates to me in language that I'm not necessarily sure I understand. But I'm working on it. I'm finding that I'm coming full circle with this thing called Black English.